The Appalachian Trail is an incredibly popular 2,200-mile long public hiking trail in the eastern United States that traverses scenic, wooded, pastoral, wild and culturally resonant lands. Since 1921, it claims to be the longest hiking trail in the world, and more than 3 million people hike segments of the trail each year. The Appalachian Trail has always been deemed as generally safe, with most dangers related to weather conditions, human error, plants, animals and diseases. One other danger on the Appalachian Trail Conservancy list is hostile humans. Since its completion in 1937, there have been 13 known murders on the trail, with the first murder reported in 1974. Today we're going to talk about case number 7, the murder of Louise Chaput in 2001. Before we get into today's story, World's End posts regularly to tell you some incredible and tragic tales of travelling around the world. If you want to see more, please like and subscribe so you don't miss out. We start our story in Sherbrooke, Quebec, shortly after the 9/11 attacks. Sherbrooke was a French-speaking municipality of 160,000, once known as the Queen of the Eastern Townships. Louise and her friends were planning a hiking trip to Turkey, but after the attacks made them think twice about the hike. Reluctantly, they called it off. Louise was going to travel with her best friend Marie Pinal and her husband Dennis Masson. None of them really wanted to travel abroad or fly, so Louise suggested a trip to Mount Washington. The idea didn't really excite her friends, who had 3 young boys, and decided it just wasn't really worth the hassle of hiring a babysitter, just hike trails that they've already done many times before. Louise had 2 daughters aged 10 and 18 who she planned to bring with her on the trip instead, along with some of their friends. Unfortunately, bad weather made the trip too dangerous, and once again Louise was found without a plan to quench her thirst for adventure. When the time finally came to go to Mount Washington, no one was available to go and join her. She decided just to go by herself. She thought she'd never be able to go if she waited around. Luckily, her partner Pierre Raby decided to stay at home with the kids. Finally, Louise set off on the trip of a lifetime. On Thursday, November the 15th, 2001, Louise set off in her Ford Focus station wagon and soon crossed the border to the US from Canada at 11:15 a.m. After a quick pit stop at the convenience store in Colebrook, New Hampshire, she set her sights on Pilgrim's Grant, a small area in the White Mountain National Forest. Louise's destination was the Appalachian Mountain Club's Joe Dodge Lodge in Pilgrim's Grant. She wasn't ready to reach destination though, as she decided she wanted to go on a short hike before nightfall and before she rested for the night. This was typical of Louise, Masson told the Daily Beast. She was a strong, independent woman, and if anyone gave up, she would say, "I'll go and I'll show you that it was a great trip," and so on and so forth. Which of course, unfortunately, wasn't the case at all. She stopped by a local visitor centre and asked them to recommend a short hike in the area. They directed her to the scenic Lost Pond Trail, which was a 2-mile round trip that takes about an hour. Unfortunately, she never made it back to the lodge. When Louise didn't return home in Sherbrooke on Monday as planned, her partner Pierre called the police terrified. Her partner, daughters and friends immediately left and travelled to New Hampshire to assist in any way they can with the search for Louise. It wasn't actually long before Louise's car was found in the visitor centre car park with the keys missing. The strange part of this scene is that one of her backpacks was missing, but her hiking shoes were still in the vehicle. Everyone was holding on to any glimmer of hope, presuming that she'd fallen and twisted her ankle or fallen ill and needed help. Unfortunately, on Thanksgiving Day, Louise's body was found a quarter of a mile away from the visitor centre on the challenging Glen Boulder Trail. The next day, detectives told her friend Marie, who was working as a coroner at the time, that Louise didn't die from natural causes. Marie said, "It was like unreal," remarking that she still gets goosebumps when she tells the story. "Even when we came back to Sherbrooke, we couldn't figure out that thing about her being killed by someone. I mean, it just didn't make sense." The autopsy found that Louise had died from multiple stab wounds. Shortly after the murder, there were 2 men in the area who both claimed to have information on Louise's killer. They bizarrely started pointing the finger at each other before one of the men admitted that he still had the missing backpack and keys, which eventually found to be untrue. Since then, there were no witnesses or leads to follow at all, and the case fell cold. 4 years after, in 2005, a strange voice called one of Louise's daughters and said, "I know who killed your mother." Immediately she called the police, who then traced the call. The call was traced back to one of the men who originally claimed to know information on the case back in 2001. The police and the family decided it wasn't him. Louise's partner, now 74, was really into the case for the first few years, but no longer speaks to the media, said her daughter, explaining that his way of finally finding some sort of peace and semi-closure was to not get involved anymore. A decade after the murder, police told the family that they had a person of interest, but warned them about getting their hopes up. Some had been ruled out, while others were still the subjects of investigative focus, a cold case detective said at the time, and then nothing. There was some speculation around the Hells Angels motorcycle club. Louise was a psychologist who mostly worked in prisons and regularly worked with these bikers. Detectives at one point considered that the killer might have been someone who followed her down from New Hampshire to Canada. It was a long shot, but the police checked the cameras and anything that passed through the border that day, and they didn't see anything that sparked suspicion. The police said the most probable explanation is that Louise was murdered by a stranger. To this day, Louise's case is still a cold case with no leads or witnesses. If anyone has any information on this horrific murder, please click the link in the description and leave an anonymous tip. So that is the incredibly sad story of the murder of Louise Chaput. Such an incredibly sad story about a young woman who went for the adventure of a lifetime and unfortunately ended in tragedy. I was only going to do one video on the Appalachian Trail murders, but from the very first case I decided the stories needed telling in their entirety. This is why I decided to make a series on this. Please feel free to subscribe. I'll put all of these videos in a playlist for you to watch in series and binge to your heart's content. If you like this video, please leave a like and a comment. It's completely free and helps more than you think. Lastly, thank you for watching. I'll see you next time.